You're listening to Tapasya Loading, a boutique podcast for the holistic creative. And I'm going to be doing a solo cast for you folks today. This episode is brought to you by the Holistic Musician Academy and safeandsound.studio. Mentoring for serious creatives looking for deep support. For musicians and artists, I have a free course for you. 6 days, 1 map, real change. Please go to holisticmusicianacademy.com and click on free training. For vocation agnostic coaching and facilitation inquiries, please go to safeandsound.studio. I'm TL Mazumdar, pianist, songwriter, educator. Let's stoke the fire. Your home is destroyed. There's context coming up for this sentence in a bit. It's been a week where the word essence is something I've been contemplating on quite a bit. A couple of days back, my piano finally arrived after a rather suspenseful 2 weeks of freight tracing, delivery mishaps, and some ever so slightly frantic emails. Stress on ever so slightly. Now that might sound trivial to some, but my relationship with the piano is a complicated one. Complicated in layers so multiple that attempting to unpack it all in one go is probably not the kind of thing I find myself articulate enough to do just yet. So for now, let me try and see if I can do justice to that opening now that I have the drama turned on. I've gone on the record, often in jest. Anyone into Shakespeare here? There's this famous saying, many a true word spoken in jest. I hope I didn't murder that one. And humor can tend to be a bit of a weapon. Well, weapon's probably an overstatement, but a bit of a tool I've found myself using to deflect. But I have gone on the record, somewhat jokingly, every now and then, to mention how the day I know I'm ready to settle is the day when the room I'm living in is one that has a piano inside it. Now, purists are allowed to call me out because, full disclosure, the piano in my room right now that made it inside a few days back is not an acoustic. It's not an acoustic piano that's graced my humble Berlin apartment just yet, and I'm willing to make a note of that and the implications they might hint at, but still, for me personally, it is a piano. And if you go to the blog post that accompanies this episode, you'll see a little quaint picture I shot of it when it first arrived. Now, for context, most of my practice, artistic, pianistic, and otherwise, these past years has been a rather nomadic one. Inside studios, conservatories, and shared spaces literally all over the world that I've been attached to or collaborated with or was working at. Some of the privileges of moving in the circles that I worked my way up to, that gave me that grace. But I'd like to state for the record that my new member of the family is one of the closest things to an acoustic piano in my opinion. Now, I should also mention a little disclaimer here that this is a brand I've officially been an ambassador for over a decade now, almost 2 in fact. But hear me out. By the way, the brand I'm referring to is Nord Keyboards, who a lot of people don't know are still primarily family business with some 20 plus people. Don't quote me on that number, by the way, where every instrument is handmade. You might have seen them around with some of your favorite artists on stage. That's just a little fanboy tidbit, though. The crux of what I've been contemplating on this week is something else. In one of the most therapy-intensive phases of my life, my counselor once shared a sentence that hit, well, home. Again, layers. And that's the sentence I opened this episode with. Your home has been destroyed. He was speaking in metaphors to describe what I now understand to be the interior state I'd been carrying around with me for a while. A couple of years later, though, that metaphor, I always get confused about the pronunciation of that word, by the way. Random side note. Anyway, metaphor, pronunciation notwithstanding, got real. It got really real. Real in ways that would give David Lynch a run for his money. My apartment in a South German metropolitan is one I came back to completely destroyed after 7 months of me being stuck amidst international lockdowns, 6 cancelled flights, and quarantines that kept changing protocol, and relationships that were forming and falling apart at speeds my brain wasn't really equipped to deal with at the time. That apartment, though, that I'd been circling back to in this phase of my life amidst sporadic weeks balancing bases between London, Lisbon, Mumbai, Berlin too at times, which is where I live now. That apartment was also a fourth of my studio. And one trickle of hot water from a slightly loose tap over 7 months inside German architecture, designed more for deep cold winters and not the scalding heat that we now have in summer, was enough to destroy it entirely. That apartment. Bruce Lee really knew what he was talking about when he said, "Be water, my friend." I think I got to see a side of its power that I never really knew existed. Okay, at college, I was the boring square guy, the kind of guy in his 20s who had insurance. Now, the truth is, I was less square and more of a paranoid immigrant who'd been stateless twice in his life, acutely aware of how a single piece of paper can be the leaf that turns a life around or upside down. So, when this apartment of mine kind of stopped existing in my life the way it did, that came out weird. The insurance did cover damages. But the gaping hole that entire event left on my soul, I know, dramatic, took a minute to come to terms with. And till date, I can't really look at the photographs without mourning a little for what was a life I was clearly ready to untether myself and move on from, stood for despite. In case that sounded a little complex, this was a life I was ready to move on from. But I can't help but mourn the way this apartment and the way it kind of, that state I found it in, my last memory of the apartment, which by the way is completely restored and has a tenant in it now, thankfully. Just so you know, thanks to excellent renovation services in Germany, just on a side note, knocks on wood. But it kind of symbolized an ending to a phase of my life in a way that I can't help but mourn for when I look at these photographs. In fact, here's a tiny little side note. I actually originally intended to include them on the blog post, but I had a look at them and it was a little too intense. So I think I'll pass. Don't want to provoke the gods there. This was a phase of my life which symbolized some much needed relief for what was essentially a 20-year-old boy, yours truly, eluding demons in a somewhat desperate search for a space where being himself was not an offense, punishable in ways most of the nervous systems in the developed parts of our world are still not really equipped to fathom. That apartment was a shoebox. It was a shoebox with mostly musical equipment next to a mattress I slept on and a desk I wrote at between touring and travels to meet family. But it was still home, or at least on paper, for that phase of my life. But turns out Mother Kali saw it differently and pushed me not so gently to stop kidding myself with that theory. That's a reference to Ma Kali, the goddess of destruction in my ancestral culture. It's a lot of literature that lines up with events like these. In fact, I remember actually making that connection at the time, or my earliest thoughts in my mind. For the 6 years that followed, I've tested what was one of the scariest theories some of my teachers, mentors, have been helping heal wounds with. Asking myself questions about who I am when I'm not hiding behind a piano, hiding under a spotlight on stage, or trying to convert relics of adversities into beauty via the medium of art. Asking myself, am I safe if I stop singing? Am I safe without a piano as armor? Is music truly my identity or medicine that I've run the risk of overdosing on to numb out with? And to put my money where my word is, I have lived without my bedroom being a studio these past 6 years. I work in shared co-working spaces and studios. I don't accept lame offers for random gigs or students or clients for a beer or pizza and a testimonial to feed the ivy drip of addiction to validity or validation that's left the state of my industry as broken as it is. And most importantly, I've stopped collapsing the idea of art being represented by the instruments that carry it without dismissing the beauty in their presence and the love that goes into making them, which is an art in itself. I needed that time away from this marriage to see if true love is a myth. My conclusions? Well, cut a long story short, and this might get a little weirder than usual, but last night when my piano arrived, after I'd set it up, I said this out loud to my piano. I'm so happy that you're here. Now, I totally understand if that makes you look for the unsubscribe or cancel link or whatever button when you hear that. But honestly, it's the simplest way to describe how I feel about my relationship with music today. Just having its presence in my life. The privilege of engaging with it, knowing that I've spent enough time and energy into the process to ensure that the way I go about it is appropriate, loving, deep, and respectful. a relationship where we listen to each other. I am sober, and I'm not referring to alcohol or drugs here, but I'm sober from the addiction I was turning music into. I do not push art up my veins anymore to feel whole. I'm here, alive, and honestly writing some of my best work, in my opinion anyways, without anxious pumping out of scales, arpeggios, and vocal acrobatics or sight-reading drills every day to appease the ghosts of my past. I'm not scared shitless anymore that I'll quote-unquote lose it or be left behind. And this, despite living inside a circus where the clown thinks they become a musician by typing prompts into a robot. And to end on a why this matters note for tonight's rather quaint, somewhat odd solo cast, this is it. Here's the thing. I suspect that the lesser I needed music to represent me, the closer I ended up getting to its essence. Essence, the essential. The word that I've been contemplating on this week. Because the way I see it now, at this phase of my trajectory, the instruments, the studios, the stages, and hours spent developing an ability, a non-verbal language to express myself, the interior parts of my world to the outer, all of these continue to matter enough to me personally to devote what is essentially a lifetime to it all. But understanding that they are not where music comes from any more than a house or a building is a home was not the sweetest pill I've had to swallow. Which is why this particular era of prompt-generated quote-unquote art feels less threatening to me than just really, really embarrassing. Embarrassing for the species I happen to be a part of. A machine's ability to materialize form is not something that had ever been in question. But the form was never music. The intention behind building a relationship with it was. A piano, or whatever your instrument of choice is to express yourself through your art, that instrument won't ever really provide that relationship. It's not what drives that relationship. Neither will a stage where you think you're supposed to perform, or a fan following or audience, a career. And at this point, I'm using metaphors here. It doesn't really matter what your vocation happens to be. None of these will actually nurture that relationship. And certainly not that robot some tormented tech guru insists on selling as intelligence, which is an anomaly in itself. It feels good to let a piano back into my home, letting it into my life without asking something inappropriate of it, being proof that music lives here.
Hey folks, I hope you found that episode helpful. Here's a little request. If you did, consider sharing this episode with your folks. Think about the ways in which they might benefit the way you did. And please don't ever hesitate to reach out if you have queries. My name's TL. I'm an independent musician and educator and the founder of the Holistic Musician Academy.